Good morning, all. Dr. Raymond Silverman is a friend and a board-certified psychiatrist. Dr. Ray has been in clinical practice for 50 years. He is semi-retired from private practice, so we're grateful he takes time to do other worthwhile things like what he's been doing here several times before and today. This is his fifth presentation to our Tuesday Club. He could stand here and give a great speech, but that's not what Dr. Ray likes to do. He likes to interact. I like to ask questions, so we make a good team in that sense. He's the expert. I'm just a guy that's going to ask some questions today, and then you'll have an opportunity to do the same at the end. So please give me and give our group a great Tuesday Club greeting to Dr. Ray Silverman. And the title is Information or Manipulation, Navigating News in the Social Media World. Is your sound on?
Yeah, let me find out.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody can hear me? Good.
Yep, it is.
All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed my time here, and today we're talking about a subject that certainly affects all of us. But before I start, Ron's kind of minimal about his involvement. I want to thank Ron personally for the collaboration and for the support, in getting this done, because it is an idea that I think has much meaning in very many directions. Ron leads a number of current events groups. He's enmeshed in the news. And so our conversations about news and manipulation and information remains very important. In addition, what you just heard is very important because the previous speaker, talked about fear. And fear is what motivates our attention. And throughout this talk, you'll hear about how fear is something that we have to pay attention to as we assess the news that we're being exposed to. So I hope that you'll all see this as a fascinating subject for us to explore, because with our advancing technology and our changing systems, this is impacting on all of us. It's impacting on our children, our grandchildren. Psychiatry, psychology, social psychology, all is focused on trying to understand people and the human condition and how we all think. We feel and respond emotionally. Got to keep that in mind. It's not that we feel and respond factually. We would feel and respond emotionally. And our modern news and our modern environment plays an important and increasingly pervasive role today. It affects what we learn about, what we know, and more importantly, it affects how we feel. So with all that, what we're going to try to do is just try to understand this whole system better and to try to work with dealing with that system the best we can. So Ron and I have gone over a number of questions that we can try to entertain, trying to deal with this subject in a meaningful way.
Do you have anything you want to add to this slide?
No, that just gives us an idea of what we're trying to do. And we start.
What's most different today?
I think what's most different today is practically everything. We just live in this very complex world in which technology advances at a higher rate than our psychological ability to basically respond to it. So we're always kind of a step behind in our evolution of our ability to emotionally respond, to what we're exposed to.
You mentioned fear. Mm-hmm. What came to my mind today, first time, is the word entertainment. Mm-hmm. Are we going to get into some of that too?
We will engage a little bit of that in terms of some of the systems in which news comes across. Right. But even within the entertainment aspect of it, watch for the fear, because entertainment pleases us. Fear drives us to keep coming back for more information.
Okay. So what are we looking at here?
Well, we're looking at three pictures, and let's start with the first media disruptor, and that was the printing press, established in 1450 by a man named Gutenberg, and that really disrupted the world. And a lot of leadership in the church were very fearful, of what that was going to be. And the publication of various print media created a lot of consternation in the early world, leading to the earliest newspapers being printed in Europe in the early 1600s. That was a slow, local kind of trade, that expanded throughout time. And what we have then is, I'm going to move quickly to the next picture, which if it's clear enough to you, no, the next picture on that thing, that one up there, with what appears to be a radio and ask if any of you kind of remember this. I'll give you the date, March 12th, 1933. Well, I don't think any of us remember this, but it's something that we could imagine our parents
Was
listening
anyone
to.
around in 33?
Yeah,
Fireside chat.
that's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. My friend, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and drawing of checks.
How many recognize that? How many don't recognize what you heard? Let's have a show of hands. Dr. Ray, who was that?
Well, the static in the voice is that of FDR. On March 12th, 1933, he addressed the public for the first fireside chat, which in a sense is one of the first episodes of a president addressing the country. And that was news. And that was how it came across in that picture, with families sitting together in this idealized living room, watching, listening to what was going on, and being informed about the banking crisis, which was a major upheaval, for our parents in 1933, when the crisis that had started in 29 was evolving into a banking crisis. The picture on the right is the early development of television. So television just transferred the format from the auditory to the visual. And now we have families sitting around. I got our first TV in 1949. And in addition to Howdy Doody or Soupy Sales or the Hallmark Theater or Milton Berle, there were these beginning of news broadcasting. And some of you may remember the name Douglas. That was about 1968. Douglas Edwards, 1968, becomes some of the first news broadcasts on television. There had previously been on radio, not well listened to, but they came into television in 48 in a 15-minute format. And by the 60s, with Walter Cronkite and Douglas Edwards, it got expanded to 30 minutes. And that essentially was how people got their news. And what's that explaining to us? It's explaining to us that news is regulated in terms of time. Nobody had a phone where they could get a notification like I did today of some news event. It was regulated in terms of content because somebody had to sit in an office somewhere and decide are we going to use during these 15 minutes? What are the most important or significant things for us to address?
And we were also regulated. I mean, we were knew exactly when we were going to be able to listen to the news.
Correct.
And we can go to our channel and pick the one we wanted. There was only 2 or 3 choices.
Mhm.
Maybe we should go to the next slide. and
So
talk
that
about
was
this.
called the era of shared news. And we see the issue of the limited number of sources that people in those days, including me, had. And then you see the idea of trusted anchors. And so Walter Cronkite is this idealized figure of a newscaster who can be trusted because why? He's going to provide certain information. We believe that that information is fairly true, and he's prescribing that information or describing that information in this controlled, modulated way, and in which we all got the sense that this wasn't opinion, this was information. So we'll contrast that later with today, where there's the issue of what is information and what is opinion. But we had then kind of a shared national narrative. And so sometime today, you're going to see breaking news. And I'd ask you to think about, what does breaking news mean? What does a news alert mean? When I was growing up, a news alert meant in 1962 that the President of the United States, in 1963, the President of the United States was shot. That's news. In 1962, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis, and there were the downing of a U-2 plane. Those were news, breaking news.
Authenticity of breaking news.
Authenticity. And today, pay attention to what breaking news is and ask yourself, well, is breaking news really the forecast that there might be 4 inches of snow in 3 days? So it's a different system.
Breaking news. Now, silver cup bread comes in 2 choices.
Exactly right. So that's it. And so that's a picture to remind you of what Walter Cronkite looked like. We won't hear his voice maybe until later. And the next picture, I don't know how many of you took the train to go to work And how many of you sat on a train surrounded by people?
Oh, hands, how many of you took the train to work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many of you watched read the Tribune on the way?
Right.
How about the Sun Times?
Mhm.
How about the Daily News?
That's what-
That was mine.
Mhm.
Herald American?
Right, right. So the interesting thing, I thought this picture was kind of interesting because these people are all going to the same destination. They're probably going to the Loop in Chicago to go to work. There may be stops on the way, but they're in the same destination. And it's symbolic because they were sitting around in that newspaper, in that train, reading newspapers that were giving you the same information. And all of you who may still get the Tribune, remember a context in which you open up the pages and there's facts for 6 or 7 pages. And then you turn to a page that says opinion.
Yeah, the opinions you could get varied, but even the news, there might be a different take. I mean, my take was that the Tribune was going to be more conservative,
Mhm.
that the Sun Times was going to be more liberal. I like the Daily News myself. I felt that was that like CNN, kind of liberal, but gave you good and bad news. So, I mean, weren't they basically all using the same facts, but they were doing a little bit different take on it?
Right. And to understand, the facts were kind of coordinated on a higher level because as you research this, in 1846, the Associated Press was formed to be able to consolidate news and distribute it down the line at that time to newspapers and later to radio. In 1851 came Reuters, which was more focused on the international scene, and then the UP came in 1958. So all of those are really very, we would say, at least authoritative releases of what somebody is considering the news. And then we were exposed to Time and Look and Newsweek, where if you wanted more depth, you could go into depth getting some photographic images, which were not common in newspapers.
Would you say that news was then reported more than created?
Yes, they took what was available going on in the world, and there was less of a demand, and we'll get to that later, to always be on. Because of the limited amount of time that people had to deal with news, there was less that you had to produce. So now we're in a production of news versus a creation of news.
We thought it might be best to at least define what makes something news. As I pulled some of this stuff off the internet,
Mhm.
Our daughter Maria, graduate from KU University journalism. This sounded to me more like what makes something news. You might want to go through
Yeah,
this.
so let's just highlight some of the most important ones. And again, think about how these decisions were made. These decisions were made by a person called often a managing editor. And the managing editor was on top of the hierarchy, and he had various sections within the newspaper or magazine to determine, kind of what is world news, what's city news, what's special section news. And they would meet together and have a discussion that this is what's going to appear on page 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's a managing editors. And so they would control the content for us. Now you can say that's good or that's bad. We'll get to that later, but they were controlling content and they were making judgments on the basis of what we see here, just a few of them. The impact. How is this going to affect my readers' lives? The timeliness. Is this relevant for this immediate time frame? And how prominent is it in terms of people's awareness of what's going on in the world? Then you get into the issue, well, how bizarre is it? Because you'll always have some bizarre news. And then you have conflicts. There would be in the opinion pages discussions of different sides. We had William F. Buckley, and you had liberal commentators. So there were different sides. That's no different. And the currency, is this popular at this time? But they weren't creating popularity. They were responding to popularity. And lastly, it was human interest. What would appeal, to the most amount of people to keep them engaged. So the next slide shows kind of and I'm picking on him. Do you know who this guy is?
Who knows who that is? We'll tell you, it's Rush Limbaugh.
You mean like his name underneath?
Yeah, I get name underneath, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's all if you're
that
reading.
too. Thank you, Jim.
But I'm picking on Rush Limbaugh because I think it's just a typical and excellent example of this evolution of what's happened. and think about it in terms of how it applies today. Rush Limbaugh was kind of a nobody in 1984 when he started on a local station delivering, basically conservative focused news and information in his own kind of parody and comedy and interesting and entertainment way. For 4 years, really nothing happened because he was a small broadcaster, and we had in place in the United States up until 1987 something called the Fairness Doctrine. And many people think, well, the Fairness Doctrine meant that every program had to be balanced. That's not what the Fairness Doctrine said. The Fairness Doctrine said that every station had to offer diverse views on controversial subjects. But that means Rush Limbaugh could be on at 2 o'clock and somebody else could be on presenting alternative views at 4 or 5 o'clock. They did not have to be on together. But once the Fairness Doctrine was removed in 1987, the stations could now determine what is our political goal, what is our emotional goal. And Rush Limbaugh went national, and Rush Limbaugh became a phenomenon. And I don't know how many of you remember listening to him. I listened. He was very engaging. He was thoughtful at times. He had created the excellence in broadcasting trademark. And given that, he became one of the major figures in news broadcasting, and he became a major impetor of conservative thinking.
And if you took a car trip down south and listened to radio, you were going to hear a lot of Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, everywhere. And what he did was he took news and developed opinions. And on that opinion-driven programming, he began to collect an audience who were quite engaged in what he had to say. And along with that, talk radio itself began to become a phenomenon because it was a profit center for stations. They were getting advertisers listening to dealing with this. They could spend little money, on the one individual who they had to have on, and they could raise a lot of revenue. And so it proliferated. And so Rush Limbaugh became the beginning of the proliferation of talk radio. And you can go in all sorts of directions with
And
talk radio.
this gets us into this shift that began.
Correct. Talk radio. But you can go from Howard Stern, to Rush Limbaugh. So it takes a whole spectrum. Howard Stern is more
But he started a whole genre.
He started a whole genre, right. Then the next interesting things that happened is CNN developed in 1980, became the first 24-hour cable news. But if many of you remember CNN back in the day, it was pretty boring. I mean, it was just this repetition of news coming in from Atlanta, and they weren't going to be able to attract a big audience. Fox and MSNBC came later into the 90s, and they were now taking up a model that would blend news and entertainment and news and opinion. And there was a lot of competition, and they were all looking to get the best optimal audience. And that was the beginning of a fragmentation. So we go back from 33, Franklin Delano Roosevelt talking to the nation, Walter Cronkite, 1962 to 1981, talking to the nation. Now, to many people, talking to limited segments of the nation. So what did the constant 24-hour news change what we were seeing? So now we have CNN, we have Fox, we have MSNBC, you have the Financial News Network, but nobody's going to talk about that because it's not entertaining, And so what you got in these kinds of 24-hour news channel cycles is repetition over and over again with the same material. You got a loss of significance. They degraded our ability to determine what is significant. You have shifts that were occurring from reporting, this is what's happening today, to more interpretation. And now today we have interpretation on steroids, so it's mostly interpretation and less reporting of news.
Well, did showmanship basically then replace credentials? In other words, when I come up and I say, here I am, I have the credentials to be truthful, versus let me show you and act with my brother, be able to have the ability to pitch something more than a person who's the graduate of master's degree from KU.
Well, you're raising a question about entertainment. Entertainment is psychologically more appealing than being read the news or told what the news is.
An entertainment that you like,
Yes.
your wheelhouse.
We all have our own desired entertainment, and so we are personally attracted to that. And what's happened is there's been a fragmentation even of the cable news networks and of the news systems, so that those people who are either entertained or informed by liberal issues are attracted to certain stations, and those who are informed or entertained by conservative issues are attracted to others. Yeah. Yeah, the internet only did this. The internet increased the number of people who could offer you information. Remember, the 80s, 90s, you have these stations who are able to offer you this information. Now, with the internet on your desk, you can go to almost any source and you don't even know who the source is. And so we get into the beginning of FaceTime, and we get into Facebook, you get into social networking, and then it moves from, I want to show you a picture of my dinner, to I want to tell you what's going on in the news because I'm going to clip an article, put it on there, maybe alter it and
Right.
send it on. So that's what the internet did. The internet.
We didn't have to wait for the Tribune to
No.
come out. In fact, it changed the Tribune to fill in rather than news.
Right, but you did have to have a computer, and it probably was on a desk and it was at home. So now you have the TV at home and you had the computer at home, and you had to go sit somewhere, to be able to obtain that information. But there was this loss of gatekeepers and then proliferation of anybody who could report on the news. And so more information came, more opportunities to hear things. And along with more opportunities is the important role of deciding, well, what's true, what's false, what's partially true, and what's partially false. And that became harder to do. And this is when you first get your proliferation of foreign influences too, because with the email systems and the bot systems, you get a lot of misinformation being generated that requires more attention to sort it out in terms of what it is. The system disrupting is early in the 2000s, okay? And again, what's happening worldwide with this whole issue is that the print media is collapsing. They lose their economic base, they lose their readership, and so news goes. Along with news is local journalism, which is now much less significant in all of our lives, and we don't hear that much about it. And then again, increasing explosion of sources. And you have the Facebook, you have the shift from editors to algorithms, which we should talk about in some detail, and then the rise of these podcasters. So how many of you listen to podcasts?
How many here?
And
I see a few hands up.
And I think I'd recommend them because the right podcasts, the right curated podcasts are brilliant sources of information, of in-depth knowledge, of credible information, or of entertainment. But the problem is when you have thousands out there, it gets hard to know how to evaluate the credibility of any of the podcasts that you're hearing. So that requires this verification and research.
There's a common thread in what you've been saying. We've gone from what is basically, this is what's happening, to myself deciding what's important and what do I want to look at. I can pick not only what I want, but what opinion I might want.
Correct. You have absolute freedom to pick what opinion you want and never hear any of the other side. And psychologically, intellectually, and socially, that is a potential problem, or maybe a real problem, depending on what your view is at this point.
This is not in our slides, but do
Go ahead.
you know of any pure source that you would go to and say, well, I'm a psychiatrist, I have my own bias, we all have our own, but is there one source we can go to as opposed to the Walter Cronkite, turn it on and for a half hour, 22 minutes of commercial-free news? Is there anything, or do I have to go to like 6 different sources and trust myself?
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer. I mean, obviously you can go to C-SPAN, but I don't think anybody can stay awake for a long time, during C-SPAN. There are some pure basic news sources, but I think the goal is probably not to be able to try to find one, but to have a facility to be open to listening to a number of different sources that present different perspectives.
You know,
But I want to go on to AI generation if you want to talk about that one for a second. Because this is, you all know this slide, and I'm not talking here about a flip phone. You have a flip phone and you want to make a call, that's perfectly okay. What happened with Steve Jobs was the introduction of the apps onto the smartphone in 2007. And from every scientific article you can read, that was a major disruptor in so many ways for young people and for us, because it has allowed us this feeling of, I have access to everything. And you do. You have access to a whole lot of stuff right in that little device. And while it has, extraordinary amount of power to do good, it has power to influence how we think and how we feel. And more importantly, it is programmed to influence what we go back to looking at over and over and over again. So
we get into then social media.
yeah. Now,
And-
let me ask this question. How many people use YouTube or Facebook for any of your news?
Okay, there's
Yeah.
a few.
Okay, and a few. But if this was an audience of 20 or 30-year-olds, 70% of people would raise their hand and say, I get the substantial part of my news from YouTube, from Facebook, from Reddit.
And let me explain what
Yeah.
the red line on the top
Mhm.
is YouTube. And you can see how from 2019 to 2025, it's gone up. The blue one is Facebook. That's the second one. And the third one is Instagram.
Yeah.
Those are the ones. The others are less so. But how much is truly news versus opinion?
And when you get to those platforms, it becomes incredibly difficult. And I think the working assumption has to be, this is an opinion until I can prove that it is indeed news. And I don't know if you want to go to a practical strategy now in terms of AI, because AI, you've heard AI being malicious, and it can be. You've heard about AI giving false information, which it can, certainly. However, you can also use AI or something just like a search to try to determine, is what I'm reading fundamentally true, or is it totally fake? And AI has the danger of creating simply a lot of fake news very quickly, but it also gives you a tool, sometimes for free, in which you can take a subject and ask AI, one or two of them, Chat, Claude, any of them, how can you verify this for me? And how can you refine what it is I'm reading? So if you're doing a serious study about trying to seriously understand something like the Supreme Court's decision on the Voting Rights Act, if you're looking to try to understand something about, issues in medicine in which you're reading about proteins being, quote, good for you because the FDA is now going to let you have protein. If you really want to try to accumulate knowledge, AI used appropriately can give you great access to knowledge, but it can do great harm. So it's, nuclear energy can probably do great benefits.
I don't want this to derail you, but as you talk, I come up with these questions.
Mhm.
One is our attention span.
Mhm.
The attention span, when I think of what occurred back in Lincoln Douglas debates, people could stand there for 3 hours and listen. And now I talk to college professors who tell me they can't get 3 minutes worth of attention. People are I want sound bites. I mean, how many of you here in this audience even have your grandkids respond to email? It has to be a text message now, doesn't it? Not email. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into that as another talk, but our attention
Yes.
span, that to me proliferates some of this quick stuff where I can just go on and
Yeah, well, if any of you deal with any of these platforms, Instagram or Facebook, you'll always find reels of things that are entertaining. Some people it's cats and dogs, some people it's political arguments, and you flip through them. And if you notice, what happens is the more you pay attention to one subject, the more you're going to be fed that same subject. Is that what you're thinking about? That we are being captured by an algorithm that really plays a powerful role in determining what we see. Now, I've actually thought about two examples. One is a fairly neutral example, and one is a more politically charged example. The neutral example is a woman who is 25 or 26 having her first baby and begins to explore the process of breastfeeding. And I want to tell you how quickly that can go. And I'll do that one because it's the more neutral one, but it can be used in the political world too. The other example is ICE. But the breastfeeding one, I'm just going to give you a simple. This woman starts with an exploration of how do I increase my natural breastfeeding. The AI algorithm looks at, well, she's looking for baby care and she's looking for nursing supply, but it also picks up, she's looking for natural parenting. From that natural parenting, they go to wellness. So now she's going to be finding information about how to live a clean life. What's the best thing to do? Along with that awareness then comes, maybe you can't trust mainstream medicine. How often have you seen the expression, doctors won't tell you this? Big pharma doesn't want you to know this because they want you to hide, they want to hide the natural cures. Now we get her leading into alternative health claims about, treatments for a variety of subjects which have no medical relevance. And now you've started out looking at, is breastfeeding, how do I encourage breastfeeding and is it good, to a system of information that comes to her telling her that she better be careful about protecting her baby, avoiding the hidden dangers, not trusting legitimate sources. And it happens in every area. And so it's a powerful algorithm that you need to pay attention to and look for the X on top of some of these things where you can stop it.
You may have covered some of this slide. What do you think?
Pardon? Yeah, we can go on, but basically it's fragmentation. Yeah, we've seen fragmentation leading to polarization, and which is that one now?
This one is U.S. media figures, audience,
Yeah,
age, and
let's go back,
style.
but I just want you to point out, Joe Rogan is one of the most
That's the one on the top.
news influencer today.
What you can't read is that it's a medium age of 30 with 11 million episodes per view, or views per episode.
And compare that to CBS News.
And then Ben Shapiro, average medium age 33, 3 million. The Anderson Cooper, medium age 50, 878,000, as opposed to 11 million. Well, anyway, and Rachel Maddow on the bottom, 60, the average medium age, 2.27 million.
Yeah, so we're seeing a stratification on age. We're seeing a stratification on popularity. And who would imagine in the day of Walter Cronkite that Joe Rogan, who is a comedian, who is a reality show person, would have more influence than almost anybody else on television? I mean, it's just an incredible phenomenon to think about, and to think about how do you process that in terms of your own understanding of the world. Now, that's another chart, another look at what's this local news situation? Well, you know that there's been a decline in local news, print matter, et cetera, but what that has systematically done to us is shifted our interest in things that are more out of our control. So if you're in Northbrook or if you're in Highland Park and you're engaged in local news, you kind of are concerned about what's going on in your school district. You're concerned about what are taxes, how are roads being repaired, how safe is my environment, how good are the police, and those are issues that are getting masked for all of us, because where do you go for local news? I used to read the Highland Park News. It's a rag now.
We talked about the role emotion plays.
Yeah.
What you can't read, let me read to you. On the far left, news. A new study reveals that news media intentionally reports over 95% negative stories. Up next, the alarming amount of depression in adults who consistently watch the news. The middle one, how some of the news media reacts to stuff. And on the bottom right, I want you to stop watching the cable news network and switch to the Ignorance is Bliss channel.
So you can take some of those as recommendations, but I want you to understand these are phenomena that affect all of us. This is not a matter of a certain group of people, a certain political relationship. It's just a human response to the way our systems are creating information and indoctrinating us and exposing it to us. And so more news, more exposure, more emotional reactivity is going to have its constant impact on us. And so that's why we'll get to the habits that we might engage in that will help us later. But before that, you want to talk about what's the emotional impact of modern media. So let's just break this down into the psychological components. If you are exposed a lot, the first issue is being overloaded. You just can't listen to an hour and a half or two. And I don't care whether it's MSNBC or whether it's Fox or any of the channels. You can't be exposed to that much visual and emotional thing without being overloaded. You're going to feel that everything is a crisis. You're going to get stressed and fatigued and ultimately somewhat desensitized. What happens then is I have to feel, because it's normal, if all this is happening in the world today, how much anxiety should I have? So I see a plane hitting a truck going into New Jersey. How much anxiety do I have to have about my next plane flight? Well, basically none, because, that's an extraordinarily rare experience, but we hear it. And I'd also raise the question of, you hear about crime. I know people who have not gone to the city of Chicago for years because of perception and reality. There's a reality to crime and a perception. But if you go to Chicago at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if you go to Chicago for dinner at 6 or 6:30, it's a perfectly safe place to be, except for the very rare experiences of crime that are going to occur. But that's not our perception because we've been inundated with a sense of fear and apprehension, which the data does not support because you can be in equal or greater danger in small cities in the South than in big cities in the North. So it's that sense of constant danger, a distorted perception of risk. And last, you get to this issue, very difficult issue of anger and polarization. How many of you know family members that aren't talking to each other because they see certain issues as morally so extreme that I can't be in association with anybody who holds those values? Outrage exceeds our understanding, and it ultimately gets into strained relationships.
So how does a psychiatrist look at how news affects me?
Well, I think you have to ask which psychiatrist and how sane he is. But, all I can say is that
I see you're married too.
yeah, it certainly affects it affects us all. This is not a matter of, oh, he's damaged, he's troubled, he's not hearing this right. It affects us all. It's a universal phenomenon because our brains are wired to respond to certain information in a certain way. And it doesn't matter whether it's Tucker Carlson or whether it's Rachel Maddow. Our brains are wired to pick up information that is alarming, set off signals, and increase the sense of fear, apprehension, or dread. So news today is triggering anxiety and apprehension in a way for those who are exposed to it than never done before. Now, I will say something about me and older audiences that we tend to be exposed to it more now. And I'd ask you to think back, to earlier days when you were raising children, when you were going to work, when you were overwhelmed by responsibility of daily life. Not only was the system different, but we were more engaged in stuff that wasn't as emotionally evocative for us. We had work to do, behaviors to engage in, and actions to accomplish. So what's happened psychosocially in this whole system is this loss of trust. The conflicting information and the polarization has led me to be more uncertain about what I can believe. So take any major news issue, from medicine to Voting Rights Act, and you don't know what to believe because you're going to see it framed a certain way. You're going to have too much information coming in at you if you expose yourself to it. So we'll talk about limiting. And we're all vulnerable to misinformation. It is not liberals who are vulnerable to misinformation. It is not conservatives who are vulnerable to information. It's not libertarians who are vulnerable. It is all of us. We are living in a fishbowl where the potential for misinformation is actively there almost all the time for us to be connected with. And sometimes, misinformation seems bad, and I agree that it's not ideal, But misinformation isn't, quote, fake news. Misinformation is taking a bit of what's happened and leaving out some other portions so you don't have a healthy perspective. So
Let's have a show of hands here. How many here see a duck? Raise your hand. Okay, put your hands down. How many here see a rabbit? Raise your hand. How many here, okay, lower your hands. How many here see both? Okay,
now you can't, right? Because, okay, so this is a figure ground illusion, where you could ask the question, well, what is this? What is it? And for those people who are looking at it a certain way, it's absolutely a duck. And for those people looking at another way, it is absolutely not a duck. You're out of your mind. How can that be? How can that be a duck? And so I want to raise this issue, which is a psychological issue, in terms of how we respond to what we hear and see. We react to certain patterns in our mind that prepare us for what to see. So some of us are reacting to the figure, some of us are reacting to the ground. The same in what we are exposed to, the same in news and current events. It can be either sometimes, depending on the meaning that we've assigned to the issue. So getting back to politics, there will be some people you talk to say, well, we have a serious problem with immigration and people being here illegally. We're just trying to make this country safe. That is a perception.
yeah.
And then you have others who
So-
have a different perception.
So this is important. If I see a duck and my wife sees a rabbit,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that we're both should be considered the other an idiot.
That is the bottom line. First of all, you'll be in trouble if you can see it right. But the bottom
So what-
point is that it's a matter of perception.
Yeah, so what do we do about all this? You put this one together. In
Yeah.
fact, you felt this was important enough, Dr. Ray, that we sent this as the link. If you still have your Tuesday Club link,
Mhm.
and there's a few on stage for those of you who don't print off of what you get. But go ahead,
Okay,
tell
well,
us about
I
this.
actually stole this from Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Effective People. But I thought for us to be effective, we should have 7 habits to be good media users. And that's media, whether you're reading the Tribune, media, whether you're watching the CBS News at 5 o'clock here, 5:30 here, or whether you're listening to a cable news talk show. First of all, first suggestion is limit the intake. Find some other things to go do. Go take a walk, plant a flower, spend time with kids, grandchildren, if they'll be with you. Whatever it is to do that you can limit your intake, because you don't have to be exposed to this constantly. And lastly, think about reading versus visual. If you're sitting down with a Wall Street Journal or you're sitting down with a New York Times, you can get the information you want, but you're able to kind of remove yourself emotionally from the power that has somebody saying, well, what about that? I'm just asking these questions. What could be wrong with that? Isn't it likely, this is the most recent one, isn't it likely that Erica Kirk was involved in her husband's assassination? I'm not making that up. That's a true media experience. I'm just asking the question, couldn't he be involved? Couldn't she be involved in it? Doesn't she have this to benefit from it? Look at what she's doing now. Look at how she walked onto that platform. It's a proliferation of visual, emotional experiences that can attract or appall you, or repel you, depending on how you feel about it. I want to skip down to just slow down your emotional reactions. If you're listening to something or even reading something and you feel emotionally evoked by that, that's terrible. How can that be? This is the end of our world. This is the end of democracy. Slow down that emotional reaction. Take a step back. Go take your walk. Come back and read more about it. I'd also add, if you're using AI, take the article you're upset about, copy and paste it into one of your free AIs and ask this question. Give me a perspective on this. If you were an expert in this, what would your answer be? And let's see what it comes up with, because I'll almost guarantee it'll come up with some balanced perspective that'll calm you down. Verify before you believe it, because we're faced with a fishbowl of partially true information, and you've got to sort out what is it that's significant and important and what is not. And lastly, protect your peace of mind. That means be a calm person versus having to be the most knowledgeable person about every specific detail that's happening in the news world today. And these are just some reports. If it looks like news, it may be, but then it may not be. It could be just an advertisement. Watch for that, on all the social medias. Lastly, another one is just because you hear it over and over and over again does not mean it's true. Repetition tends to stay in our minds. And the other thing to keep in mind psychologically is something called the availability heuristic, that what we feel, have heard most recently, that is most powerful, stays in our mind. Airplane crashes are the significant one of that. Airplane always heightens availability heuristic. I remember that. It was powerful. Strong emotion is always part of the message, so tamper down that emotion or at least be aware of it. And some content can look real, especially on these social media platforms, but they're not going to be. So today, if you go to a social media platform, make yourself a decision. I'm going to look for what's fake. I'm going to look for what's not real. Not only are you going to pay attention to the email spams you get, pay attention to the news spams that you get, because you're getting a lot of news spamming.
It's all valuable. And again, I'll remind everyone that that handout is available through the link you received from the Tuesday Club, if you didn't get one here. Also, this program is being recorded. Dr. Ray has agreed to have it be recorded, so it's going to be available at the website, the North Shore Senior website, in a couple of weeks. And in the interest of our time, we talked about artificial intelligence and how important that may be and how divisive in some ways it is. It almost deserves its own program. Let me just read what it says. How do we verify? And what about artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence isn't Walter Cronkite, but neither is cable news. The difference is that artificial intelligence can be forced to justify itself. Most talking heads, regardless of whether left, right, or indifferent, can't.
And let me just add to that it's not AI kind of forcing to justify itself. It's AI going out, accumulating the information and giving you, if you ask it correctly, and you must ask it correctly, the proper balance of information. And I do this often where it'll say, this part is true, this part is verified, this part I can't find any evidence that this is actually true. And that's what's most important.
Did you go through when you think about asking the questions? Because I know, for example, between our interactions, I've asked a question, I got an answer. You asked it a better way, and you ended up with a much better answer. The question that you asked is so important. What process do you go through?
Well, it's called a prompt. And, the prompt is the thing you put into that little chat area that says, so
we're talking about something like
ChatGPT or Claude, one of those things. And what you're doing is looking at a prompt. And if you just say, tell me about this, it's kind of too open-minded. You have to say, verify what's accurate versus not accurate. Explain to me alternative positions about this. I can sometimes say to it, I don't fully understand how you can say that. And it will go back and elaborate. It will sometimes correct itself. So give it an opportunity to be comfortable with it and be able to use it in an inquiring mind. So you have two minds. You have an inquiring mind is, I really want to know what the most accurate thinking about this is, versus how should I put it? Not inquiring mind, but a determined mind. I want to affirm that the belief I have is true. And that's the balance is nuance. So think about acquiring information rather than affirming what I believe is true. That's the psychology.
We may need to do a whole other program on artificial intelligence, and we'll leave questions for the end.
Okay.
But if someone like Walter Cronkite were reporting today, would he still be trusted, or would he just be one more voice? What's your opinion?
Well, from what we've talked about today, I don't think Walter Cronkite could exist in the world today, because we are too inundated with too many other sources. When you had AP, UP, and Reuters, and you have Walter Cronkite as the voice announcing that information to us, it was a very different system. We can't go back, to that world. We live in a very different milieu and media environment. And it's like fish in water. If you asked a fish floating in that fish bowl, how does the water feel to you today? They'd look like at you like you were crazy. What's water? They'd say. This is just the environment we live in. So we have these last two cartoons, and one is a little more political than the other, but I would say to you that democracy and civil society does not require that everybody agree.
It says democracy on the pencil.
Right.
And fake news is
Right.
the
And it's a danger. It's a
pencil
danger.
eraser.
But it doesn't require that everybody agree what even fake news is. It does require that enough people, maybe people sitting in this room, will still believe that there is a reality that can be checked and that evidence does matter, and opponents, and people who view things differently than we do are not our enemies. They're just people who have different perceptions of the duck.
Let's give Dr. Ray a big hand.
Okay. Well,
And we'll take your questions from the audience, and then we'll see what we
I
have
don't
on
think you
share.
have to go to AI to find that. When I do a search now,
Mhm.
it does have a AI automatic thing when I'm looking for it. So it sort of gives balance.
Google, yeah, you can go to traditional Google. You can,
What I'm going.
yeah, you can force it. It's probably Google, you can go to traditional Google.
Julie, by the way, there's 28 on Zoom.
You used an adjective in talking about AI,
Mhm.
and I forgot what that adjective is. But I was think you were saying that some AI is more trustworthy, whatever that means, than other AI.
Okay, I think it's I'm thinking that maybe it was when I said AI can be used in a malicious way.
Yeah.
It can generate a lot of bad stuff. It can be used by bad actors. It can be used by foreign countries to decimate our society. That's bad AI, but that's humans using it badly. AI, if you go to Chat, if you go to Claude, if you go to Perplexity, if you go to any of these others, they're just a calculator. Think about it as a calculator. And they're going to get it, you enter numbers. It's the quality of the numbers you enter that you have to think about. How good is the question I'm asking? How much am I asking it to give me sources? How much do I trust the sources? If I go to an AI question, it will pull up sources. I can see it's from the Wall Street Journal. I can see it's from the New York Times. I can see it's from Newsweek. And then if I want to, I can even go further and look at the original source. So it's a valuable tool, but it inherently is not good or evil depending on what we do with it. Yeah.
Doesn't it matter what the subject of the news is? If it's politics, you quickly learn who's telling the truth and who isn't.
Mhm.
And so much for that. But on the local news, they always say, if it bleeds, it leads. You see the fire in the west, you see floods. There's nothing not to believe. You see with your own eyes. Now we have January 6, 2021. There are people who saw that with their own eyes who said, gee, all those men and women, they were patriots. As they smashed through the windows and doors of the Capitol, it's very easy to discern when and how truth is being spoken.
Don, let
Yes.
me add to yours, okay? Because I want to ask it in a slightly different way. How do we, or can we, defeat our own personal information bias? Because what Don said, saying someone will disagree totally, I happen to agree with him, some others won't. How do I know that I am not looking at it through my own clouded eyes? Is there any objective way to go after this?
The first thing you did positively was ask, could it be possible? You asked that question. If you just ask questions, is it possible? Then you can then look for what the reality is. We share views about January 6th. I saw it and I felt it, and it's very disturbing to see this quote revision of experiences, but they're going to be people who turn the focus on something else to be able to move away. We can't change the minds. All you can do is not fall into the system. And when it comes to any historical event, the opportunity for say distorting it or manipulating it for other purposes becomes possible. And I think that's just the age we're living in now. And then you have to make your own personal decision. But don't try to get rid of your bias. Just try to be aware that the person on the other side of the room is going to have another bias. And when I got back to saying about what's reality, you could argue about reality. You can't argue about the bias.
Okay, we got two more hands up in the back, Arnie.
Oh.
Right.
Okay, two gentlemen. While we're waiting, let me read Linda Deutsch's question. Dr. Ray, what is the real danger of the government taking over some of the news, like CBS? Or does that get into?
That's beyond my capabilities to answer. Obviously it's worrisome. Pay attention to what's going on. Turn to the stations that you feel you can trust, but listen at times to the ones that you kind of don't feel are as comfortable for you. But yeah, we're living in a perplexing time, and our current situation kind of exaggerates some of the issues that are playing a role. But there are people who will go back to 2020 and say, look, we were exposed to misinformation then too, and historically there were mistakes made. But we have to kind of keep attuned to what's going on.
Yeah, I kind of lost confidence in the news in early 70s when I heard Richard Daley, original Daley, give a speech. And then I went home and listened to it on the news. And it was all about Orlando Wilson becoming the police commissioner. It was like two different speeches. Now, the other thing is, your 15 minutes of news in the early days, that didn't have any advertising, did it? Now you have advertising, and the big joke was Kennedy was ready to tell what happened on the accident when the woman went into the thing, and they would say, "Well, time out, we can't do it. We have to go to commercial."
Yeah, aliens land on Nebraska after the commercial.
Right. Right.
Detail.
I think Timex, the news was sponsored, I believe, wasn't it Timex? And other things sponsored the whole 15-minute broadcast.
Yes, I have a comment. I read an article that my wife cut out of the Tribune on the opinion page on Sunday, and I believe her name is Elizabeth Shackelford or something thereabouts. And she says that one of our dangers coming on are the numbers of billionaires and the damage they can do to all of the above. And these were the owners of Tesla and Facebook and Amazon and about 7 others that are all similar. And that these people have so much money and they are kind of sucking up to the political powers because they're into other adventures, and they can just do terrible damage to our democracy. So I hope you'll all read it.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Wait, I see one more.
Going to say about that article.
By your mouth, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say about that article that really what we're kind of talking about is a form of oligarchy where you have this historical situation where the rich own everything and the average person gets zero.
I'm reminded of the robber barons time of the 1900s, 1920s. Well, somehow our parents and grandparents survived that. I think hopefully we could all take a perspective and say, look, this is complicated times at best, and we'll see if we can survive another robber baron period.
One more, then I have a question. Go ahead. Then I'll have the last question because I've got the mic. Go ahead.
See, the media, you hear me?
Repeat that, please.
Oh, we're talking about using the media such as your television, your phone, and so forth. But what I do to verify facts is I get a bunch of magazines with all different attitudes.
Mhm.
But it takes time. You have to read them.
Right.
And nobody wants to read anymore.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Kids today don't even know how.
Last question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit off the communications track, but the word civility comes to my mind.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts about how civility shades everything that we've said in the last hour?
Okay, I'm gonna try not to make this too political, but I think we live in a rather strange environment now. And I was just having a conversation with a friend this morning about, she said, why aren't you happy? I said, I'm not unhappy. I'm content, but I'm not happy. I am not happy because I think we live in this time of turmoil and chaos and manipulation of people and ideas that is impacting on us. But civility, I think, is at the local level. That's the only place you can model it right now.
Local as in myself?
Local yourself, local this group, local the community that we're in, because the manipulation that we see, and again, if you get up in the morning and you read a Truth Social post from last night, many of us are going to be emotionally evoked by some of the content. There is a general at the highest levels, and I think if anything, we could make a change by insisting at some level that leadership not engage in the demonization or the belittling or the terrorizing people of the danger of the other side. We are the other side to somebody. I don't think I'm that dangerous, but let's keep it in the perspective of there's no subjects that can't be discussed and no subjects makes you the demon and me the angel. And when you stop, when we move away from that, I think our whole system will improve.
Let's give Dr. Ray a big hand.
Yeah.
And thank you so much.